All right, now let's move on to one of my favorite parts, mapping of stakeholders. This is where things start to get interesting, or depending on your patience level, a little messy. So we are going to look at the next two elements, the company and the government's positions and interests, and the community's positions, interests, and locations. There is something really important to remember. We need to split this analysis in two parts, the conflict escalation and the conflict resolutions. Because during the conflict escalations, we need to identify all stakeholders, everyone who is involved, whether directly or indirectly, because some of them will be pushing the conflict to the crisis, while others will be trying to calm things down. After that, during the conflict resolutions, things usually start to shift. Most stakeholders begin to work together looking for solutions and reducing tensions. So mapping stakeholders help us see who is who in the conflicts, where they stand, and how their role change as the conflict evolves. So from these two elements onwards, we'll focus on the prongs inside each element that help us analyze the social conflict and assign values needed to calculate the overall social license to operate for each stage. One social license to operate for the conflict escalation, first analysis, and another social license to operate level for the conflict resolutions, right? So let's go to the next. Firstly, let's talk about positions and interests. So to really understand the difference between these two concepts, we can use the iceberg analogy. So the position is like the tip of the iceberg, the part we can see above the water. It's what the mayor of a community or a government official express publicly. On the other hand, interests are like the submerged part of the iceberg, the part hidden under the surface. These are the underlying reasons behind the position that are not immediately visible. For instance, if the mayor demands that the company withdraw, saying no to the mining, yes to the agriculture, that is the position. But their underlying interests may include things like wanting the company to support development, protect local jobs, and maintain environmental sustainability. By thinking of position and interest like the tip and base of the iceberg, we can better understand what stakeholders really care about, not just what they say publicly. So that's why it's crucial to focus on addressing the underlying interests rather than the visible positions. In other words, if you want to resolve a conflict, you need to understand and address the interest behind the positions. Now, during the mapping process, we are not just identifying who is involved, but also their positions and interests, because we give signs and values to every stakeholders, showing exactly where they stand during the conflict. Let's start with position and signs. Stakeholders who are against the company use negative signs. Stakeholders who are neutral use a zero sign. And those who are in favor of the company use a positive sign. So the rule is simple for neutral. Any stakeholder whose position is neutral gets a zero sign, regardless everything, regardless, for example, their level of political power and many other things. If they are neutral, they have a zero sign. Now, let's assign values to stakeholders. So in the government elements, according to these prompts, we use the following scales. So the company itself is assigned a zero value. The local government or municipal government has a value of 1. The regional government or county government, in the case of other countries, has a value of 2. And the national government is assigned a value of 3. So here, the rule is simple. The more political power a government actor has, the higher its value. Okay, let's look at an example to make this really concrete. During the conflict escalation, this is the red line in the picture, we have the following scenario. We have the company, and we have two local governments, LG1 and LG2. They are opposing the company. Thus, we have negative signs here. We have the regional government that is in favor. We have positive sign here. And the national government, NG, that is also in favor, that we have the plus sign here. So using our value system in the prompts here, we assign 0 for the company itself, we assign -1 for each government that opposes to the company, we assign +2 for the regional government, and finally we assign +3 for the national governments. Now, here is an important rule. If any stakeholder is neutral, their value is automatically 0. So, for example, if the national government were neutral instead of in favor, its value will change from 3 to 0, as you see here, right? After that, during the conflict resolution, the blue line in the picture, at the negotiation table, for instance, each party is generally willing to find solutions. So many stakeholders step back from their conflict activity, start sharing their concerns, and focus on solutions. Because of this change, their position changed to a positive value, reflecting that they are now actively supporting resolution rather than the conflict. Keep in mind that this is a different scenario. Some stakeholders may drop out of the conflict once things start moving toward resolutions, while new stakeholders may appear to help solve the conflict. For instance, here we have a minister with a neutral position and a congressman with a neutral position as well. So this is completely normal. Conflicts are dynamic. People and organizations enter and exit as their interests change or as the situations evolve. So when we map stakeholders, we have to remember that the list of stakeholders is not static. It changes depending on the stage of the situation of the conflict. Now let's go to the next elements and take a look at the prompts inside the community elements. Let's start with positions. We have a negative sign for communities against the projects, 0 sign value for neutral position, and a positive sign for communities in favor of the project. Here we use 0 value for stakeholders in a neutral position, stakeholders such as NGOs, communities, and other social actors. For example, an NGO may be behind the conflict, but not directly confronting the company. These NGOs usually support communities through activities like legal assistance, training, raising awareness about human rights, and so on. Even though they are not on the front line of the conflict, they still play an important supporting role. However, if social actors are on the front line of the conflict, they will be assigned a value. This means that they are actively involved, taking visible actions, making decisions, or directly influencing how the conflict unfolds. So if you see the prompts here, you will see the area of influence. That's why let's talk about the area of influence here. When the company arrives, the company needs to define the area of influence, considering environmental and social factors. Environmental factors, for example, identify local ecosystems and biodiversity that may be affected by the company, or assessing the impact on water resources, or evaluating potential displacement of communities. Imagine, or analyzing air quality impacts from dust and emissions, monitoring potential economic effects on local employment or livelihoods. So once the company identifies the area of influence, that could be a large or a small area, the result is that some communities are directly located inside the area of influence. For example, here we have C1 and C2. What happened? Usually, the company works with these communities on social projects that benefits the community members. These communities are assigned a value of 1. However, when we have the area of influence, some communities near of area of influence are not located inside, but they are near. They usually don't receive any benefits, neither from the company nor from the governments. These communities are assigned a value of 2. Finally, we have some communities are located far away from the company, but they still experience impacts, especially from the company's logistics operations during the mineral transportation or the machinery transportation, and also from the storage and export facilities. For example, community 5, 6, and 7. These communities are expressed across a large territory and are assigned a value of 3. You may ask, why does a local conflict expand? Well, it usually means that the local parties are not able to reach an agreement and the conflict escalates. And when the conflict escalates to a territorial or even a national level, it becomes more visible and more complex. So the rule is simple. The farther a community is from the company's core operations, the higher its value. Okay, let's see an example. Let's start in the conflict escalation stage. During conflict escalation, imagine the following scenario. We have the company itself here, and we have 2 communities inside the area of influence. Both communities complain about the company's impact. We have negative signs for each community. Also, we have 2 NGOs, a local NGO and international NGO. Using our value system here in the prompts, so the 2 communities inside the area of influence are assigned a value of 1, and the position is negative. We have -1 for each community because they are opposing the company. And the 2 NGOs, the local and the international NGO, are assigned a value of 0 because they are neutral. They support communities rather than direct participating in the conflict. So this graph shows how communities oppositions and NGO support are represented in the stakeholders mapping during conflict escalation. Let's go to the solution stage or the conflict resolution stage. So in these examples, we have the same stakeholder list. As you see, we have the company, community 1, community 2, and both NGOs. So as you can see, each community inside the area of influence now has a positive value 1, reflecting their participation in finding solutions. On the other side, the 2 NGOs have a 0 value, reflecting that they are not on the front line. They are simply supporting the communities in building negotiation and dialogue skills. This is a good sign. It shows how early dialogue and open communication can actually prevent a bigger confrontation and conflict escalation. Okay, let's recap these 2 elements. First, we need to map stakeholders in 2 stages. Remember, in the conflict escalation stage, and another in the conflict resolution stage. So we need to map the stakeholders in these two stages. For the conflict escalations, there are stakeholders, governments, and communities against the company, others in favors. The same happened in the conflict resolution. However, you have to keep in mind that some stakeholders may be present in both stages, while others may drop off or only appear during conflict resolution. Okay, now let's go to the next stage or the next element. This is the stakeholders activity.